Okay, cool. Let's get going here. Yeah, so this is hosted by, the Cloud Native Global Black Belt team. We're actually called the Digital and App Innovation Global Black Belt team now, but it's the same people. It's myself, Reiko, and Dave Strabel, who are also here today with me. So it's we have a good turnout. And yeah, we are all on the same team. We all focus on mostly the same things, whether that be Kubernetes all up within Azure, as well as the CNCF ecosystem. Dave has written a book, which is on the left-hand side here, which we will always post on these office hours. And myself and Ray have not written books, but those are our GitHub handles, and that's Dave's Twitter if you wanted to get a hold of us. Why are we doing these calls? We are trying to promote AKS and Kubernetes in not only the open source ecosystem, but, with our Azure customers that we get to talk to. One of the cool things that we get to do in our jobs is, work with enterprise customers across the Americas and, help them with their transition to cloud native applications, whether that be on Kubernetes or AKS or not. And so this is one of those, as well as just to provide, AKS customers with updates around the cloud native ecosystem. So yeah, thanks all for joining. And yeah, feel free to share these calls with whoever else you might think would be interested, whether that be your customers if you're internal here, or, your colleagues if you're external. And what to expect today. We have, just a quick welcome. I'm doing that and the AKS ecosystem updates. Today, I did not update this slide, but we have a presentation from the AKS product group just on the updates that AKS is going through and sort of the roadmap and what's coming down the pipe. And then, as always, you can ask questions both in the chat or, feel free to come off mute and ask questions at the end. We usually have a bit of time for that. So if you have, burning desire questions, please save those to the end. And yeah, we do want two-way interaction. So yeah, if you have feedback for our product group or for us or for where you think these calls should go, we are all ears. And yeah, we want to make these calls useful for the community and for everyone. Cool. So I'm going to go through the AKS updates quickly. These are going to be a little bit quicker just because this whole call is a lot of AKS updates. So let me start with this. These release notes, there was a release that came out on the 19th. It should be completed, I think, by tomorrow, since today is June 30th, which is crazy. You can monitor the release status here by checking out the AKS release tracker. If you haven't checked that out yet, it's pretty cool. I think Dave mentioned it last time, but it went GA just this past month. And it shows you like when each release is rolling out region by region. The other update I'll just call out quickly, I don't think we've called it out yet, is if you're using Azure Network Policy Manager, so like Azure Network Policies instead of like Calico or the two options you have with AKS, the Azure NPM will increase its pod memory limit from 300 megs to 1 gig when you're using the uptime SLA. And this kind of goes along with, a few other changes we have made on uptime SLA clusters, including limits on the API server, as well as a few other things. We've talked about some of the Kubernetes 1.24 updates already. There's a huge number of updates in the upstream Kubernetes version. There's like over 46 enhancements, including the Docker shim removal. But then there's a few changes that have been made sort of as defaults within AKS project itself. So check those out because as the version deprecation of 1.21 happens, then those changes will start taking effect kind of end of July. That's when the GA goes 1.24 and as well as the deprecation based on our support policy. Connectivity rollout is expected to be completed by the end of June. I realize that's today, so maybe I think if George is here, maybe he can give an update on that when he goes through his stuff, because I haven't heard if that's actually completed fully by today. And then the last thing I wanted to call out, there was a GA of HTTP proxy support for AKS clusters. So if you use an HTTP proxy within your enterprise, or if you have customers that do that, essentially there was no way initially of bootstrapping that config. So if you had, environment variables it needed or certificates necessary to access the internet, this was a common ask from a ton of different customers. That's now GA, and that was a super, I'd say, common feature that we see a lot in the field. And it also works now, the GA piece, it works now with all the AKS managed add-ons. That's sort of the AKS updates there. And the next slide. Oh yeah, I see, Richard. Yeah, AKS private clusters now support API via integration preview. Thanks, Richard. You're right. And then yeah, 1.24 AKS still supports the beta APIs. Yeah, so you can, there's a ton, if there's a blog actually on the 1.24 differences for Kubernetes. So I'd recommend reading that as you are kind of moving to the newest version. Some other features I wanted to call out, you can now disable CSI storage drivers. This is a public preview feature. Essentially, before you couldn't, they were always enabled. And so now you have an API to enable and disable them. That's for file disk and the node pool snapshot controllers. So yeah, you can disable them each one individually, or you can enable them afterwards if you decided that you actually want to use them. Of course, make sure that you're not using any volume resources before doing that disabling. Node pool snapshots, 2 behavior changes that I wanted to call out. Node pool snapshots, those allow you to take like a config snapshot of your node pool and then create new node pools or new clusters based essentially on that snapshot. So long as that Kubernetes version is still supported within AKS. This was really useful for customers who wanted to lock down or wanted to make consistent rather the node image version, operating system type, OS SKU, and Kubernetes version across clusters. So if you're like, hey, I really require this specific version or this specific node image, then that was super useful. Right now, that has changed. So the behavior change is that you can now only take snapshots from node pools with provisioning status as succeeded. Before, I think there was some undefined behavior when it was creating or failed on that node pool. And then upgrades for spot node pools are available starting this week. I think that was last week. This will involve, so the difference here between, upgrading a spot node pool and a, when I say regular, I mean like normal AKS node pool, virtual machine scale set node pool. There is, so the main differences here are that there is a coordinate and eviction notice on the node, but there is no drain API call that is actually applied. So essentially your pods need to respect that eviction API call, and then the nodes can be upgraded in place because there's also no idea of that surge or that max surge value within spot node pools. So, and you set that max surge on the regular node pools to be, 1 or 2 nodes or have a percentage like 33% or something. That doesn't exist for spot node pools. Those upgrades can happen in place. So I can see if there's any questions. Bug fix, there was a Kata bug fix that rolled out as well. So if you're using either Kata, if you downloaded Kata yourself, or you have you're using the managed add-on for Kata within AKS, there was this sort of weird bug that happened around the cluster role not being there. Yeah, so if you use that, that's a call out for you there. And that was mostly it. I did cherry pick some of those release notes, but those were the ones that I thought were most important. And then the only other kind of community updates I wanted to call out was, there was a blog talking about securing Kubernetes pods after pod security policies get deprecated. So that has been decided that they will be deprecated in 1.25. I think we've talked about this a lot within the AKS project, but this was a good blog. It talked about securing the pod kind of from soup to nuts, so the whole thing. And then, yeah, this was not an AKS GA, but rather an Azure one. So the Azure API Management Self-Hosted Gateway v2 went GA recently. And this gets used a lot, I think, or does get used a lot within the AKS ecosystem, just because those self-hosted gateways can be hosted on something like an AKS cluster. And essentially, it allows you to, it expands your APIM features if you're using that, and it like gives you support for like hybrid or multi-cloud environments, for instance. So this V2 GA was exciting because it offers support for open telemetry from a tracing perspective, as well as a deployment option using Helm. So before that wasn't there. And then there's also a lot fewer egress requirements for connectivity. So they have sort of made that clean that up a little bit. So that was exciting. I think we're going to get more people using it now. And let's see. Yeah, one quick note on upcoming sessions. We do have another session in 2 weeks. With also the product group, we have it with Michael Withrow. He talks about some of the security updates coming down the pipe there, so that's great. And then we are going to take a short break for August. So we've kind of postponed some of those sessions. But yeah, again, we want to bring this back up in the fall in September. And so we would love to get some feedback as well as, keep some energy going there in terms of what sessions people would love to see and what they are finding most useful out of these sessions. So always open ears to feedback there. Maybe we'll have a little poll or something next time. And then otherwise than that, I think that was all I had there. I can post some of these links in the chat, but I think George was able to join this call.
I was. Yeah. I am here.
Okay, how's it going? Thanks, George. Yeah, I'll pass it over to you now if that's cool.
Sounds good. Let me go ahead and share my screen and do the typical dance and see how everything is working. And you see my screen?
We can now. It's pretty small, but.
So let's get some zoom on this. Maybe one more. How's it now?
That's good for me. I think anyone else. Yeah.
All right, if it's small for, I see a few thumbs up. If it's small for everybody, just let me know. I'll hit it another time. All right, so hi everyone. My name is George Palma, for those of you that don't know me. I've been here a couple times in the past, as well as a few folks in the AKS team. The PM lead for AKS, and we're going to go through the AKS roadmap today. You might have seen this method before, but the way that we're going to go through it is directly from our public GitHub and from our public roadmap in GitHub. And we're going to go from right to left. So we're going to go and start from the GAs into public previews in progress, planned, and the backlog. So from each column. To make this smooth and get us good time for discussions and questions, I'll probably suggest that we have questions. So feel free to jump in with questions from any item in that column and any of the columns that I already covered. And then I'll leave some time at the end for just broader questions of items that maybe I didn't cover. I will go a little bit quick on most of these. So do jump in, ideally out of mute, so I can make sure that I get you and ask any questions that you might have. So starting from, again, on the right-hand side, on the generally available, we did have a couple of events last month in May, namely KubeCon and Build, and so there's quite a good amount of healthy items, healthy number of items here. So I'll go through some of them, and I hope that most of you have been looking at those in our announcements as well. So NAT Gateway is currently GA as both a bring your own option as well as a managed option. That means that you can create an AKS cluster with an outbound type NAT Gateway from an existing or new and AKS managed one. Company proxy options is the ability for you to specify essentially proxy settings when you're creating an AKS cluster for cases where you might be behind a company proxy as an example, and that is also GA as we speak. The next one, there's a number of networking GA pieces from dedicated subnets, which has been one of our long-standing previews that had quite a few incompatibilities with how kubeproxy itself handled the addition of new CIDRs. So that was actually something that we had to wait a lot on upstream to actually get some of the improvements into kube-proxy, and we actually cherry-picked that in AKS into 1.23. And so from 1.23 onwards, you can actually safely use multiple subnets or unique subnets per node pool, and that is now GA. And together with that, that should be somewhere down the line. So I'll just skip to it. Where is it? Interesting. Well, I'm not seeing it, but somewhere down the line should be also essentially what we call the enhanced subnet support. You might have heard it generally as well as Azure CNI v2 or dynamic CNI, and that is essentially what gives Azure CNI now the ability to have and to attribute IPs to pods dynamically so that you don't have wasteful usage of IPs across nodes instead of having like a very static allocation of IPs like a /24 per nodes. That in the case of Azure CNI, because they come from the subnet, that might cause some wastage. In this case, you actually get dynamic allocation per node so that you can have 50 on one node and 10 on another as an example. And you actually can have a different subnet for nodes and pods themselves, and this is also GA now. And you can easily use it by just passing on the dedicated pod subnet parameter when you're creating the cluster in the node pool. Moving from there down, we have the AKS release tracker as well. So the release tracker, as Alice mentioned before, allows you to just follow the AKS releases through this web portal and basically see which region already has a release and what's the next region that will contain that release, and past releases as well, and has the links to here on GitHub to the release notes of each specific release, and you get to basically know exactly when that feature or when that bug fix or when the behavior change hit a specific region and have control over that. Next one up, or next two up, I'll probably bundle these two, is the ability to propagate tags to dependent resources. So as you do AKS create -- tags, essentially, you're able to have those tags in all AKS manager resources. And we call those as shared resources. So things like the load balancer or the NSGs or subnets, all these things. There is still resources that have their own tags that you can then control and have, for example, different abilities for like cost purposes, like you might want to cross-charge things like nodes. So nodes come in node pools have their own tags, as you might know. IPs might come from different services, and in the service you can also pass an annotation to put the tag if you want. So you can have, as an example, a team going on having one node pool and one IP or 3 IPs for their services, all of those tagged with their own team name, for example, and then you can see that rough cost there, and then obviously the shared cost is the shared cost from the cluster, such as, for example, the LB cost itself, which all teams in that case will be using, and you could split that cost as an example or cross-charge it 3 ways or 2 ways, depending on how many teams are using that cluster. All right, so this is just one of the examples of how you can use this tag propagation, how you can granularly still manipulate it. And the second one is the ability to mutate the existing labels and taints. It's just something that was a big request some time ago. Like the only way to do that was to create new node pools, and I can actually update on existing node pools as well. On the Windows side, a few updates, as you might have seen. GMSA for Windows has GA'd as well in May, and the other update was Windows Accelerated Networking down here. So let me actually click so you know where I'm going. So Windows Accelerated Networking has GA'd, and so has our GMSA support for Windows as well. Next up, Kubernetes version 1.23 was GA'd in May as well, and you'll see on the next line as well that Kubernetes 1.24 is currently in preview, and it's going to be GA'd next month, just as an FYI. Down this line, we have the customized node configuration, so the ability to pass on custom properties when you create the node pool to the operating system, kernel, or to the kubelet. So all these custom settings are able to pass them on at node pool creation, and this has now been GA as well. Together with that, one of the key things that you can do is actually configure the containerd kind of rotation, like the size of the logs and actually the maximum size before it rotates. So yeah, actually GA support for kind of custom log options as well as per ticket 1062 as well. GitOps agent, and as you might know, based on Flux and enable you to have these kind of GitOps flows on AKS and Azure Arc as well, was also GA'd in May. And so pretty happy to have that together with Dapper as two extensions on AKS that GA'd last month as well. And again, Dapper, for those of you that don't know, this kind of our microservice runtime development framework there. Next up, we have cluster scale down mode, which basically allows you to define if you want your node pools to scale or auto scale down and by deleting the VMs or actually by stopping them. So you can control granularly what the behavior there is. And again, benefits there might be to conserve, for example, network attached disks or anything that you might have attached to that VM while you're just powering it down instead of actually deleting it. And when you scale up, the behavior will be to start the stop VMs before creating new ones as well, naturally. Next on, something we're pretty excited, although the name here is a bit of a misnomer for history purposes, which is privileged containers on Windows. They actually are called host process containers, specifically because there's not the same concept of privilege and root in kind of Windows as there is in Linux. So the name is also a little bit different to indicate those differences, but the use cases that it serves is really the same as those that you can imagine for privileged containers in Linux. So it's the ability to access the host, the ability also to run a host network and access host functions, etc. Whereas other process containers are not going to have access to the host file system by default, so on and so forth like that. The next one down, we've touched on accelerated networking, is the something we call alias minor version. To some extent, other cases is creating the cluster without specifying the patch version. So you can, when you create a node pool or a cluster today, you can already put on your CLI or automation or whatever it is where you might want to do this, just a Kubernetes minor version. So you can do something like 1.24 instead of 1.24.2. And that will create the latest patch version for you. So that works both on the control plane and the cluster creation, as well as the node pool creation as well. So you can create that node pool on 1.23, and that will create a node pool in the latest 1.23 patch version as well. And this can be helpful for several things on, as an example, as I mentioned before, on automation, so that you don't have to continuously update the patch as patches are rolled over. This can kind of help you keep that just creating new clusters on the latest patch version within that minor version.
If I can throw a quick note out, George.
Mm-hmm.
So just because this confused me the first time I went to look at it, alias minor version only supports GA versions. So if you do 1.23 and we have 1.23.7 in preview, that's it'll get 1.23.5. But if you do 1.24, since we only have a preview version of 1.24, it'll say no eligible releases. Just so you know.
That is right. So it will never go into mistakenly creating a preview version for you. It will always stay within GA versions. All right. So continuing there on, where was I? Accelerated networking privilege. There you go. On the connectivity space, we basically, as Alice said, we're planning on having this by the end of this month. Currently, we are one batch of regions left. So we might go a little bit into July, probably a couple days into July, because it's literally on the last batch. So very, very close to be everywhere, and you can expect it pretty much worst case scenario end of this week or Monday to be everywhere. The Dapper add-on, already talked about it. Those process containers, kind of the dedupe from above. And yep, so the next one is support for Calico on Windows, which is GA literally this week. So you can now use Calico network policies on Windows in GA. All right, so that finishes up the generally available. Any questions on this side? If not, I'm going to go to public previews. And again, feel free to jump in at any time for any of the items we're going through or have gone through. So from the top, we have draft. If you haven't seen some of our build presentations, some of our online sessions on this, is a new bootstrapping tool for you to kind of wrap around existing repositories or folders that have your code and actually provide you with the correct Docker files and manifests to deploy to an AKS cluster. And then you can use draft as well to kind of wrap that all into ACR and into the AKS cluster of your choice as well. And it will create GitHub Actions and CI/CD pipelines through GitHub Actions for you to have that safely deployed into AKS. And then you can iterate from there, create new code commits, and those GitHub pipelines will run every time you do a new PR to that repo. Next, we have node authorization admission controller. Just a few security hardenings for how our nodes are bootstrapped and are being created. 1.24, we already talked about that. And that's currently in GA. Sorry, it's currently in preview, and it's going to go GA next month. And together with that, you should be also kind of aware. We have had this quite a few times in our release notes. It's kind of a PSA for everyone. That it is going to make like in the old world, you could just basically use kubectl kind of vanilla and AKS clusters AD integrated to log in. That support was kind of deprecated from upstream, and so this is kind of now moved into the exec plugin, which is something that is then going to be by provider, etc. So there's not this central support in kubectl per se. And what that essentially means for you is if you're using get credentials as usual from AKS, you don't really need to take any action because we are downloading kube login for you and installing it as well as the the install CLI, not get credentials. We're downloading the kube login binary for you and installing it locally. And when you get credentials, you already get the kube config with the right format. But if you're not, and you're getting these on your own way, you might get a kubectl get nodes or whatever that will try to find this exact binary and will fail because it's not present locally. So that means that you need to install kube login manually or run the AKS install CLI, and we'll get that installed for you. So keep that in mind. All providers now will have to, from 124 on, have to have their own exact plugin because kubectl is not going to be doing that centrally anymore. Custom CA Trust is the new one. Let me click back there so you know where I am on the screen. So custom CA Trust, again, the ability to pass on kind of custom certificate authority trust as you are bootstrapping nodes. So you can put that through our API, and we will essentially drop that into the right folders in the nodes. And then you're able to use this for, say, things like on-prem private registries, etc. Next up, BRIO kubelet identity, meaning that you are able to update a cluster, create a cluster, etc., with your own kubelet identity. And more specifically, as you are migrating from service principals, if you still have some of those clusters, into managed identity, as you might know, there's two types of identities in the AKS cluster. There is the control plane one and the kubelet one. And if you have something like, say, ASRs or multiple ASRs or registries or any other thing that you have given that service principal permission to, when you update into managed identity, you will want to make sure that potentially you pre-create an identity, you give that identity permission to your ASRs, to your ACR, sorry, to your container registries. And when you give that identity permission, you can then update your cluster with it so that your cluster never loses those pool permissions at any point. If you just update into a new identity, that cluster might lose permissions to pull from the Azure Container Registry for a while or to access any other resources that you give that permission to until you then reassign those permissions back into those identities. So this is, again, just to make sure that when you update from service principal into managed identity, you can do it without any disruption where you can pre-create that identity, give any permissions necessary, and then just assign it to the kubelet via this update mechanism. All right, API server VNet integration is a little bit of a novel way that we're currently exploring that we hope to be very successful and become the default soon to create AKS clusters and in specific AKS private clusters, where instead of kind of projecting a little bit of the IP of the API server to the subnet, like kind of the private link technology that probably most of you know from Azure, we're actually doing that by injecting the API server IP into the its own subnet, and that was going to allow for a number of additional positive consequences, like you won't need any more things like tunnel connectivity that we just said before, so we won't need those components there anymore, which is going to free up resources and hopefully also remove any additional problems that might cause because the tunnel is down or there was some noisy neighbor issues in there, etc. And it's going to allow for a lot of additional capabilities as we're going to bring this into public clusters as well, and you're going to be able to go back and forth from between public and private, which today is not something that you can do, and a number of other things. Saw your hand go up, Patrick. You want to say something there?
Actually, I hit the hand instead of applause by accident. But I will add one change that I really like that's in there is because the IP for the API server is being VNet integrated, it can't be changed by the customer, which means we were safe to program the nodes to talk directly to that IP. And that means that while private DNS may still be necessary for clients, if they've turned off public FQDN, the cluster now has no provisioning dependencies on private DNS.
Good call out there. Yeah, so from architectural perspective of AKS as a service, as well as to maybe a lot of you that have to configure it, it should bring in the long run a number of benefits to how you set up the architecture. Again, the breaking that dependency with private DNS and a number of other, and tunnel and a number of other things is definitely something that we've seen great results with. All right, so carrying on in public preview and also something that we hope to have in GA really soon. We're currently targeting the end of next month to get this one in GA is the support for KMS as a and Key Vault as a provider to encrypt your secrets. So as you might know, this is basically the ability to have etcd, the secrets in etcd encrypted with a encryption key that is stored on Azure Key Vault. And so that's currently in private preview, in public preview, and it's going to go GA again with an ETA of 1 month, around 1 month into the 30th of June right now. Capacity reservation. This is the ability to define a specific pre-allocated capacity in Azure for you, and that you can then spread across one or more clusters, one or more node pools. And you always have that ensured capacity allocated to you. So that means that even if your node pool is at 0, if you give it a capacity reservation group, you're going to always be able to go from 0 to whatever is left in that capacity reservation group. So it means 100 nodes. Those 100 nodes will always scale up like that. And this has a few benefits because obviously you are paying for that capacity. But if you're using it across multiple clusters, multiple node pools are always running, you always can assure that you have that minimum capacity across all your clusters when you're scaling up and down. CNI mode none, and I think I saw on the agenda that you've had some talks on this recently, so I'm not going to go too much into this, but this is basically the ability to have your cluster come up with no plugin, no CNI plugin whatsoever, and then allowing you to go ahead and install any third-party plugins supported by those vendors, be it Calico, Cilium, etc., and just following those. We know most of the vendors, I believe, have updated their instructions to use this. If not, do reach out to them because if their instructions do not tell you to put your cluster in a CNI mode none, those instructions are probably outdated and they're doing some funkiness in the clusters that is likely not good. So definitely reach out to those providers and see if there's an update of those documents using the CNI mode none. Dedicated hosts, again, Azure feature to allow you to have fully dedicated. Imagine like physical racks where you control the actual host, and it's all for you, all allocated for you, and then you can have all a number of VMs installed in them in that host, and you have granular control over its maintenance, so on and so forth. And on AKS, you can deploy clusters and node pools and individual node pools into specific dedicated hosts, and then that node pool is going to scale up to the capacity of that host back and forth. This is currently in preview, and we hope to GA it as well very soon in the next couple of months. Defender for containers, and specifically runtime security, runtime scanning, is currently in public preview. Again, Azure Defender or Microsoft Defender for containers is our security product kind of suite or suite of capabilities, from registry scanning to runtime scanning, so on and so forth. And this is currently in preview, and we're going to be GAing it in the next few months as well. Custom policy for AKS, the ability to have your own custom policies defined. We hope to GA it in the next quarter. And this is basically just aside from all the built-in policies that we already provide, and you can continue to ask for us for any new built-in policy that you think will help you, and we're happy to consider it as well. This gives you the full flexibility to define your own as well if they're very specific to your organization or to your customer. GPU multi-instance support, specific for the GPUs that support this kind of partitioning from NVIDIA in specific, which is kind of the ability for you to have those GPUs actually fully partitioned, kind of all the way down to kind of the hardware level, even though it's logical, and to have your applications then take the best use of those GPUs without actually having to consume the whole GPU if they don't need it. You can actually partition it and have multiple applications and multiple pods using from that GPU. Node pool start stop, pretty self-explanatory, I would hope, but that's basically the ability to start and stop a node pool, which is basically going to send it to 0 and send it back to whatever value it was before, and it kind of goes in tandem with the cluster start stop feature as well. Event grid events, where we might know, and I know some of you are using it to get events for, say, when new versions hit a region and when they're ready to upgrade, and to plug in several automations. And by the way, we'd love to know what more kind of events you would love to have on from AKS so that you can plug in your own automations on it. Just let us know, and we're happy to add it. This has been in preview for a little while now for us to kind of collect that feedback, and we're going to GA it in the next quarter as well. Creation of node pools in different subnets as well in Azure CNI. By the way, isn't this GA, Patrick?
That is. Thank you. Can you drag it over?
Yes, sir.
I missed that one when I was updating after build.
That was quite a few there, and we already talked about that one. So moving forward on that one, and we're going into resource health. So resource health integration, you get all kinds of information from your cluster. This is technically already fairly GA, but we want to make a little bit more of a rounded experience, and so we're combining a few pieces of work on resource health, service health, and also the diagnose and solve blade from AKS before we GA this, so that it's a little bit more of a smooth experience. Where right now, I know there's some questions on a few of you, like when do I use which, what kind of capability comes when. In kind of a short way, resource health will provide you information about the health of the cluster in terms of most of the control planes, the part that you don't see, like is there something wrong with my control plane? Can I go there and see if there's something wrong? So anything happens to that resource, this will tell you. Service health, normally it will be service notifications, like when we send you messages, that's where they typically go. And sometimes we'll send you emails as well, and they'll match up with those messages as well. And the diagnose and solve blade is really kind of a troubleshooter that you can run. So it's not really gonna just say, is my cluster healthy, yes or no? It's actually gonna run a number of troubleshooting queries from our backend and tell you a number of information there from if you have any nodes running out of IPs or overcommitting memory, or some application doing a very high number of requests to the API. All those things will be in the troubleshoot and solve blade of AKS. Direct server return for Windows when calc is enabled. I believe this one is also completed. I'll double check on that one. and we should be good to GA this now that we GA Calico as well. Plane maintenance window, something we're doing a few more changes. For those that might be wondering, why is this one so kept so long in preview? It's because we were actually doing additional integrations with the Azure maintenance kind of configuration, the broader and higher level Azure maintenance. And so that those are now finalizing, and we hope to have it as well in the next couple of months, GAing the plane maintenance window and plane schedules. Azure Migrate for Windows, technically already out in preview, and it's currently being integrated into the portal Azure Migrate flow as well, but you can already migrate, say, .NET applications that are running on a Windows VM into AKS Windows nodes as well. So this is already out there. It's a standalone tool today, as you'll see from the docs, but it's being plugged in right now into the broader Azure Migrate story, and then we'll move it to GA there. It is kind of GA that tool. We just haven't moved it here to kind of make that moment where it actually becomes part of the broader migrate flow, kind of announcing that as well. Disabling the CSI drivers. So for those of you that don't use storage, we had some requests about actually just getting rid of those drivers altogether because you don't plan to use storage in that cluster, for example. So this actually gives you the ability to turn off each individual storage driver depending on what you're using there. Now, again, obvious consequences that you turn off disk driver, you're not able to use Azure Disk. You turn off file driver, you're not able to use Azure Files, etc. And so that's kind of the obvious consequence I would expect. But this allows you to, if you don't have those needs for storage, to actually just disable those, and those pods will not be consuming resources or running in your cluster anymore. CADA support, something we announced at Build last month as well. It's currently in preview, working towards GA right now. Again, would love to know what kind of things you'd love to have in terms of the SCADA integration, what things do you expect, and what kind of additional experiences would you like to simplify your life, your operations, your development. So let us know. But other than that, we're walking towards the GA of CADA on AKS over the next few months as well. IPv6 addresses and support for IPv6, as you might know, is in preview for KubeNet. We do hope to have the GA coming soon, as the LB probes fix is pretty much very close to being done. So over the next few months, we hope to GA it in KubeNet, and we hope to bring it into new networking modes as well. InfiniBand supports, this is something you can actually already work around today. So what we're doing right now is for InfiniBand to actually work, and for the drivers that you can install to work, the VMSSs need to be, or the skill sets need to be with this property single placement group equals true. So we're, for every InfiniBand capable SKU, we're turning this one by default to true. These are very large SKUs. As well, the consequence is, as per our docs, is that the node pools then with this SKU are not able to go past 100, because that's kind of the limitation of this property, but that's what's required in order to use InfiniBand capabilities. So you can have multiple, obviously, node pools of that size, but they all can only go to 100, so you can have InfiniBand on those nodes. And then you can just install the drivers and use them at will. So really no action here. It's really all about just creating the node pool in the cluster with the right SKU. One reason we have it in preview, though, is we are improving that experience. So right now you do install those drivers, and one of the things that we want, a little bit like with GPU, is we want to make sure that we install those drivers for you, so you can just get that SKU and then start using it right away, and not worry if it's maximizing and utilizing InfiniBand or not. Next
one
up,
quick
Windows.
Note on
Yep.
One really quick addition to that one is that 100 limit for the single placement group. Customers can do a quota request, and that can potentially go up to 300. It's in the documentation, but it is a thing that's available.
Thanks, Patrick. All right. Next up, we have Windows Server 2022, also released in build, and we're currently working towards the GA. Again, hopefully very straightforward kind of explanation there. Support for the latest and greatest release of Windows, and we're currently finalizing all the last things to have it in GA in the next few months. And last up on the preview list, there is support for ARM-based processors, so ARM64, versus what pretty much has been there all along, which is the x86-based processors. And we hope to have this more around the next quarter timeframe, probably towards the end of next quarter. All right, so this finishes public preview and generally available. I will be going a little bit faster, keeping time in mind on the next 2 columns. So any questions? All right, so from the top on the in progress column, we have some work on the confidentiality side, both support for the confidential VMs, MD-based, trusted VM support, trusted boot as well. Have Eraser, which is a project that is upstream that you can already also install yourself if you want and test it out. That will delete unused images from your cluster, hence the name. So if your images are not being used, Eraser will go ahead and clean them up. Today, the kubelet and Kubernetes clean those up only based on disk usage. So an Eraser will be doing that based on actual utilization of those images or lack thereof. Then a few improvements on SSH for nodes, namely the ability to turn it on and off and the ability to protect it behind AAD. So for those of you that want to ban SSH access, which I salute you, you can turn it off. And for those of you that still need that SSH access but want to harden it a bit further without using keys, etc., you're going to be able to have it behind AAD authentication as well. Ubuntu 22.04 released last April. We're currently working on building and bringing back that support, and so that for those of you that have been around for long and saw the change from 16.04 to 18.04 on AKS, this is going to be following a similar pattern. So we will be announcing which version of Kubernetes will receive 22.04. We've been doing some tests with it. It seems pretty promising and not as gnarly as some of the migrations that had to happen from 16 to 18.04 with a number of systemd changes. So hopefully this will be a very smooth process for all of you with just a simple upgrade. Then we have upgrade cancellation, which is basically the ability to stop an ongoing upgrade for whatever reason, because you're detecting problems or time constraint or any reason whatsoever that will warrant a cancellation of that upgrade. We're going to be providing you that ability over the next couple months, followed by image signing and guardrails. So image signing, probably you know it very well through Notary. Guardrails is the ability that we're building to actually for specifically cluster admins, platform admins, to be able to harden that cluster in a way that follows best practices. Harden here is a bit of a misnomer. Don't think security, but think specifically all kinds of best practices that you expect users to follow. Say, for example, the specific usage of limits, but also maybe validation that the PDBs are being set up and they're being set up in a way that are not conflicting. Like if you're setting up a deployment of 2 replicas and have a PDB minimum of 2, then that's a bad PDB, and guardrails will either alert you or stop you depending on which mode of enforcement you have on. And so you're going to have kind of a one option to just click and it will apply all these best practices into the cluster. And by the way, if you have any best practice that you definitely love to have in this bundle of guardrails, just let us know. Happy to consider it as well. It's going to have an early start of like 15 or so best practices baked into it. So hope to be very comprehensive, but definitely it's not going to have the full set of it from the preview start. And so a preview will be obviously an opt-in, and it will be something that you can turn on and turn off, and also, as I said, set up which mode you have. So you can put it into warning mode or into enforcement mode. And warning mode will basically assume that you do a kubectl command. You will actually print a response that will tell you if there's something wrong or if everything is okay. And if you're using other tools, it will still be stored in Kubernetes events so that you can go back and see those and see that an action was done that violated the guardrails and best practices. Get some water here. All right, so next up in this column, actually this one is also done. So is that one. So let me skim through and mention some of the things that are coming sooner. So this one, as I mentioned, is going to be completing the InfiniBand support that I mentioned before. We are working on kind of publishing the CIS benchmarks for Windows as well as we've done for Linux. So we have both the Kubernetes and Linux benchmarks for our Linux nodes, and so we'll be doing the exact same for Windows. So you can expect a similar doc there. Kuproxy with IPVS support, something we're looking at as well, in addition to the current mode, the IP tables mode it currently supports. Going above 1,000 nodes, this is currently happy to kind of share that with this forum. We currently have this in private preview, so if anybody wants to go above 1,000 nodes, just let us know, and we're happy to kind of onboard you into that. So just let us know. We're happy to do it, and we're planning to launch it publicly in the next couple of months as well. Been a lot of great work there. We're happy to write a lot about it once it's out. And I think that's pretty much it in what's coming fairly soon. Moving here and going a little bit more into trends on the plan and the backlog. So we're doing a lot of work on upgrade to make upgrade and auto upgrade specifically a lot better by both providing you more control over the upgrades to allow you to, for example, put upgrades in a monthly schedule as an example versus kind of the current weekly schedule, allowing you to set up kind of environments and kind of a little bit of a staggered upgrade throughout different environments. We're obviously adding additional identity providers. We are adding a number of core compute and core storage features that both Azure is launching, and we're bringing a number of them, such as the ephemeral OS encryption, just as an example, but also other things like VMSS capabilities or other CIP capabilities that we're also going to bring up. We are working for quite some time, and we have a design going for this one to actually be able to provide things such as the static egress for specific services. And so we hope to bring that up over the ongoing semester that's ahead of us, and that you're able to have for your specific service a constant egress. So also a lot of continuation of a few networking capabilities that I've mentioned before. And again, still same trends on the backlog. Again, a lot of focus there on upgrade, as well as in your application SLO. Again, the ability to have backup, which is currently in private preview, and extending that into public, as well as having more capabilities, having a lot of upgrade focus in terms of allowing you to maximize the SLO and SLA of your application specifically, not necessarily to just ensure the AKS SLO that the operation succeeds, but actually to allow you to put your own kind of success metrics into it as well. And let me stop here and give at least 5 minutes for any set of questions that you might have, both inside of this roadmap or anything that's top of mind for you.
We answered a few in the chat already. Oh yeah.
Do you have some, Alice, on the chat that you want to kind of bring up?
There was a few in the chat already, but I just was gonna say if anyone wants to come off mute. Okay, looks like Darwin just posted one in there.
Can you hear
Why
me?
use security anymore? Yes. And for folks that might not be seeing the chat, our question is if we have images every week and we have a node image upgrade and auto upgrade as well, why would we use QRD anymore? And that's a great question. And the answer is you don't have to. There's the notion of QRD here is really for the nightly patches that we receive that sometimes might require a reboot. If you are doing that weekly image upgrade, you won't really need it. There is, in theory, we might push a nightly patch today that might require a reboot that QRD could act upon tomorrow. If you don't have any maintenance on it, you could act right away, or it could act on next Saturday. And that could technically deliver that patch sooner than maybe your auto upgrade that happens on the following Monday. That is really one of the only benefits that you have right now from having QRD. In addition to that, we are working, just as an FYI, you'll see it here in many names in our GitHub issues. We are working in a more managed way to even provide those security patches. So the ones that we deliver nightly today, specifically focused on security, so that even for the cases where, such as in your question, you might be using node image upgrade or not, we take care of the nightly upgrades for you if you want, or we kind of shut them off completely and defer everything to node image.
Thank you.
Go back up. Secret store to support syncing secrets without the need to mount them. Yeah, there is some work towards that, mostly exploratory still. Obviously, we do have KMS, as I mentioned before, that just encrypts them all together, and then you can use the secrets natively as you could today. But we are looking at the CSI secret store to see if there's other ways to do it. I mean, we had some requests for sometimes as environment variables, which is not super secure, but we know it's something that folks use still quite a lot. So we are still looking into that and see if there's secure ways for us to do it. Any plans to bring container optimized OS for worker nodes? Yes, there are plans. Not a lot more than I can share now in terms of ETAs or specifics on those plans, but yes, it's an ask and a request that we've heard a lot, and it's definitely in our plans. And carrying on, and that Richard pretty much nailed it. That's pretty much it in terms of the time that you need to have that done. AKS fleet. I'm assuming you mean like the managing of AKS, multiple AKS clusters. So yeah, we're looking at a number of different ways to provide that larger scale management and see what kind of ways we can provide. So if you have specific needs or specific asks and requests about managing AKS clusters at scale, just let us know, and we're happy to kind of loop you into some of the things that we're planning, and to a number of the features that we're planning to launch soon to help the management at scale, aside from obviously things that we already have from policy, etc. We currently don't have a much bigger update, except that we have a lot of folks working aggressively on it, and we hope to have more news on it later this year. We will not be bringing Lighthouse support. I think that's all the comments. Let me see.
Yeah, it looks good from my side. Okay, one more.
Yep, we are addressing that limit of 30 Windows containers. Probably more towards the end of the next semester, that should be lifted.
Cool. We are over time, so thanks, George, for staying on a couple extra minutes answering the questions. Richard, I can pass your Lighthouse request on to Shashank, but no promises there. Yeah, thanks everyone for joining, and thanks, George, for going through that. That was awesome. And yeah, feel free to join us in the next couple weeks here for our security update, and we can have a bunch more of these questions answered and updates on those. Cool. Have a good day, everyone. Happy Thursday. Good long weekend. Thanks, George. Thanks, Patrick.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.